I think Mad Max 3 from 1985 is vastly underrated, and if you go back to Roger Ebert, the great Chicago Sun-Times critic, original review, he absolutely praises this. He gives it 4 stars out of 4. He says it's a wonder world, a sequel that's a lot better than its originals, including Mad Max 2, which I think most people say is better than this Beyond Thunderdome movie. But I think this is underrated, and here's why. Now, not all movies can be appreciated from every angle. I think if you're looking for cinematic excellence in this movie, it does have some elements and some great action scenes, great shot making by the director George Miller, who I really like. But it's not all coherent, perhaps. It's kind of fantastic or fanciful. It's got a few Kitty or Goonies-like inspired sequences that may be annoying. Got a couple of characters that might be annoying. I think those particular things are what might be driving down the ratings. Only 6.2 out of 10 on IMDb.com, which is pretty male and testosterone centered. That's pretty low for this kind of movie. And only 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. That's also low. I would rate it a full star, maybe 2 higher than that. Now, one reason why is I really like science fiction, science fictional worlds, and I find that this movie is very inspiring and influential. Basically, everything to do with Fallout, the Fallout video game series, the side quest. This is like one huge side quest, big DLC for Fallout, but it's from 1985, and so I think this movie is fruitful. It inspires a whole lot of content that we have consumed and played and watched.
2 men enter! 1 man leaves! 2 men enter! 1 man leaves!
And you know, this movie is highly influential because of the Thunderdome sequence. 2 men enter, 1 man leave. There's a catchphrase that everybody still knows, or a lot of people still know, that comes directly from this movie. It's a very unique fight sequence that George Miller would repeat in Babe Pig in the City. Ebert said it's the most original fight sequence since the early karate movies from the 1970s or before. So I think, you know, the movie does have particular elements. You could say this is great. And so those particular elements that are great versus those that are not so good are at war with each other, but people are overlooking the good stuff for the bad stuff. And I think what's great about this movie to me is the science fictional world. First of all, the ending is very haunting. It's not a happy ending in my opinion, although it might look like it. Second, this movie has a lot of great political significance. It's really kind of fascinating to dig into. Metropolis. This movie is inspired wildly by Metropolis. It's a great take on Metropolis. You have the Bartertown world, the above ground trading mecca. Not really, but in the outback, this is the best they can do after the nuclear apocalypse. And then the underworld, which actually runs the Bartertown and it controls Bartertown. That is exactly like what's going on in Fritz Lang's Metropolis. But then this movie goes beyond that. So there's a side place, actually an escape, an enclave out in the desert beyond. In fact, there's a lot of movies in this. Lawrence of Arabia comes up all over the place. Mad Max is kind of a Lawrence figure, helping, inspiring, and of course he's a lone exile. Is he going to be for himself, the individualistic man, or is he going to be tribal, communal, and help the kids in the movie? That's one of the questions. And of course, Lawrence learns to love the desert, Lawrence of Arabia. I think that is what's happening here in Mad Max 3. Among the science fictional trappings here are given Bartertown and the Kids Enclave, which, you know, is repeated in a lot of Fallout games. That Kids Enclave, I feel like, comes from one of the great novels I've ever read. Personally, I think about it probably every week, which is Ridley Walker by Russell Hoban, which came out a few years before Mad Max 3. And it's sort of contemporaneous with the original Mad Max movie, written by an English children's writer, but it's a vastly rich novel set thousands, maybe longer in the future, in a post-apocalyptic England, but the characters do not know what has happened, and they sort of have vague vestiges in their language and traditions about the nuclear apocalypse that happened thousands of years before. The story is told from a first-person perspective of a 13-year-old kid going from being a child to an adult, and he is tribalistic, but seeks to do better, seeks to begin writing down his traditions, going from an oral culture to a written culture. Now, in the Kids Enclave in this movie, a couple of these kids, including one of the main characters, it's the female character who's the rebel figure, talks a lot like Ridley Walker from that novel. And you have Captain Walker, the mythological hero that the kids worship and hope will save them, I think is sort of an allusion to Ridley Walker.
It's the story of us all. We got it mouth to mouth, so you gotta listen it and remember, because what you hears today, you gotta tell the birthed tomorrow.
The film has a lot to say about politics, society, various ideals. You think about Bartertown, Auntie Entity, the Tina Turner character, is really enthusiastic and prides herself on founding the city and restoring a vestige of the old civilization that's picking up the pieces after nuclear apocalypse. So she's established Bartertown, a commercial trading center. By the way, I love that George Miller throws in an Alfred Hitchcock-like character kind of leading Max into Thunderdome and the city. It's a really great inspired moment. There's Rocky Horror Picture Show guy in here too. So a lot of filmic elements of the fact that Hitchcock or Hitchcock-like guy is in here, I think is quite funny. And you do get actually quotes from North by Northwest very early. The first scene in the movie is a quote of North by Northwest where Max is chased off by the plane. Anyway, for Bartertown, it's a commercial entity, but it's got some problems. Can a civilization like that last or not? That's what one thing the movie's asking, and it's compared to the horizontal place across the desert, the Kids Enclave. What Bartertown is missing is, frankly, children, and it's called a sleaze pit. Probably if there were children in there, they would be slaves or worse. And so you get the idea that in 1 or 2 generations, Bartertown could easily disappear. What the future is the Kids Enclave, and they're the ones who need to be saved and restored. So you don't just have this verticality, what Metropolis like with Bartertown and Underworld. You have then the Kids Enclave, a horizontality across the desert versus Bartertown. I don't think it's necessarily bad that they're founded on commerce and law, the law of Thunderdome, which prevents murders and, keeps people in check. But what they're lacking in this movie, I think this movie is very strong with this idea, is a mythos, an ideal religious world, religious ceremonies, and a myth that transcends the particular town and civilization. A Bartertown just founded on long commerce will not survive long. That's kind of what this movie is saying. And certainly with the power structure, monarchical but really dictatorial, with anti-entities attempt to take over. Interesting that when Max goes to the Kids Enclave, he tries to use power and force to dominate the kids, but the kids rebel against him. I feel like that rebellious force in the movie against monarchs, tyrants, and dictatorial entities, a la anti-entity, is a driving force of restoring civilization. This movie is trying to say, what is civilization? What will preserve it over the long term? Even though the kids are wrong and they're believing in lies, although they don't know they're lies, but they've made things up based on history, actual practical, technical, earthly history, they still are on the right track because the mythos is what they need to survive over the long term. And the movie ends, it is a spoiler alert sort of, with the telling of myths to a new generation which has babies. That's what's going to survive over the long term. And while the movie's haunting in that way, it is offering a solution out of the problems of post-nuclear war, or just in general for all time. It's kind of a universal movie. Thus, Max is like the hero with 1,000 faces. He's an individual exile wandering the desert, Lawrence-like. And is he going to help save civilization or save the children? Or is he going to work for Bartertown and kill a guy in Thunderdome? These are the choices that our hero has. He is a man with no name. He's actually called out in the movie. Clint Eastwood-like, also nobody, which is Odysseus. He is that sort of Odysseus figure, the wanderer, maybe trying to return to something, but wandering the earth and exploring and discovering. And he is actually the one who is, in the Metropolis sense, going to go into Underworld and rise up out of it. Typical savior figure stuff, descending into the Underworld and then rising back up out of it. Hades-like, Jesus Christ-like, all those Greek heroes did the same thing. That's what Max does, leading the children Pied Piper-like. Into the new horizon, the new beyond. I do feel like these Mad Max movies, I said this in my other videos on them, are following Star Wars in mostly good ways. I don't think they're copying them. I think they're taking what's good and reworking them for the post-apocalyptic outback desert scenario. Here you've got Return of the Jedi kind of sort of quoted. I like these kids as tribal members better than the Ewoks. Their language is a lot more interesting. The myth they believe in and how you figure out how they've twisted things accidentally is really interesting to me. And they're basically like Return of the Jedi, going in and trying to blow up the Death Star, the Empire. That's the case in Mad Max 2 with the Empire hounding the rebels. Now here, the rebels are inadvertently rebels. They're trying to blow up barter town. That's what they do, at least. But again, this is post-apocalyptic, not stuff out in space. This isn't space opera. This is more somber in its tones, because you know, in the critical distance you right now have between you and the world of this, that what separates you and them is nuclear apocalypse, a horrific event, possible event. And then to think about what this means for us and what we should do about it is really, really profound, in my opinion. Now, look, I still watch this movie. I find it fairly entertaining. I am annoyed by a few things. It does repeat The Road Warrior, although I think it updates it. And frankly, I found that they did try, with George Miller in particular, to try to level up Mad Max 2, which in some ways is a very simple and well-constructed action movie. Mad Max 3 adds whole worlds, whole realms, whole myths, whole ideas to Mad Max 2, and once you complicate things, it gets harder to make something good. So I do appreciate what they're doing here, especially in contrast to those sort of medieval-like, fantasy-like, early to mid to late 1980s movies. There were a lot of them, and a lot of them are pretty terrible. I find not watchable anymore, but I think this one is going to last because it will remain relevant to our world. I think the visions of it are inspiring. And so for those reasons, those are the reasons I find it pretty good and underrated. It doesn't mean everybody should like it, but I sort of do. So what do you think of Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome? Let us know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thanks and have a great day. I find another thing about this movie profound. You know, it's a meditation on modern cities, which here have been destroyed by the nuclear apocalypse, particularly Sydney in Australia. Modern cities, a lot of them have been built or reconstructed to center around machines, to get cars to different places, and they're less centered around human beings and ability to walk and thrive in communities, which makes it hard to raise children in modern cities, in my opinion, a lot of them at least. When you go to cities, how many children do you see? Where they at? Sometimes you can't find any in certain cities. And I think that's a critique that this movie offers of real-world modern cities, which by the end of the movie, the children are repopulating a decimated, destroyed Sydney. And what's the city going to be like? We don't know. Bartertown is an answer to modern cities, but it's not sufficient enough. It's still got that, you know, hierarchical power structure that doesn't work. Here, in the end, maybe things will be better because the children have their mythos. I'm not really sure, though, but at least the children are restored to the city and the machines are all gone. I'm not sure if the movie likes that or not. I feel haunted by the ending, but at least that's what's going on, I think, as an alternative to modern cities of the early 21st century.